Day 1. The journey starts here. I have been waiting for months to say this. I'm writing this as I'm sitting on a small biplane, which is taking me to base camp. I'm not sure why I even decided to write a journal. Most of the time, these research missions are dull. A few cracked pots, sometimes a skeleton. This time, I may even find something frozen. I'm going to the mountains. More specifically, the mountains of Tiri. The indigenous people avoid this range of mountains like the plague. Apparently, bad omen sits on the range, and anyone trying to climb it goes to hell. I don't know where this suspicion began, but it's one of my goals to find out. I'm not entirely sure why I have been invited. I know the geological background of the whole Tiri range, and nothing out of the ordinary appears on any of our data. Still, my side skill of documenting and journaling these events may come in handy. I hope the lead researchers send me along for a mixture of these reasons, and not only so I may look at some rocks. A note worthy of being scribbled down: we won't have help from the indigenous peoples of the Tiri range. The lead researchers had been quite adamant about it. To their knowledge, anyone having ever been near the mountains is a source of fear to the tribe. I can only hope this won't be an issue. I think that's it for the day. Nothing interesting. I'll spend the rest of the flight studying the culture of these people, learning some of their language. They can speak acceptable English, but I don't want to insult them by requiring them to speak constantly in an alien tongue. Day 2. Interview with the leader of the Porongo tribe. What do you know of the Tiri Mountains? Why do you hold the suspicion that any that climb the mountain range die? Are there written records of these suspicions coming true? Do you know someone who went up the mountain? Why don't you offer aid to us? Do you not want to know why the people die after walking up the mountains? So, this is after the interview. I scribbled these questions down on the flight after all. Turns out the language of these people is very close to that of the Geruni of the West. Having spent 3 years with this group, studying the volcano that is the base of their religion, I found the Tiri language easy to learn. I managed to have the entire conversation with the leader of the Porongo in their tongue, something which he was glad for, and mentioned how much easier he found the conversation at the end because of this. I didn't manage to catch everything he said, not on paper anyway. I can only summarize his answers. I tried to keep to the list that I wrote down, although his mind wandered off many times. To the question of the Tiri Mountains, the leader had a lot of things to say. He claimed that his people have been living in its shade for 1,000 years, which lines up with known records. He also knew a lot about its structure, mostly basalt, sometimes sprinkled with other materials and ores. It was odd to see how expertly he knew the makeup of the range. Usually, we have to get a complete geological team out to the field for months to finish such a list. He also shared many other, earlier stories of the mountains. His people believe it was placed here by the gods as a sort of gateway to hell itself, or more precisely, the land of Erina, which is what they call our version of hell. The people also claim that their ancestors were placed here as a guard against any evil that wants to come out of Erina. On the second question, he corrected me. They don't believe anyone who climbs the mountain die. More precisely, they will go to the land of Erina sooner than they are supposed to. He was very specific. They don't die, which is the problem. Whenever a person dies in their culture, their place is in Erina. But if a living person were to arrive there, they would be severely punished by whatever forces dwell in their hell. Beyond this, he didn't share much. I went on to the other questions quickly. On written records, he barely masked his amusement. To this culture, written records are more primitive than oral tales. In this little tribe, it's the duty of the father to tell the story of their people to the young and defend the family, while the mother is there to care for the children. Every boy child is taught the history from an early age and then is expected to retell the story perfectly. They are not allowed to be named men until they can regale the story to the whole tribe. For this reason, the tribe had not found the need for written records. To them, if writing down the history were necessary, their teaching methods would have failed. When I asked what happens with a child who cannot retell this story perfectly after a long time, the old man just smiled. He would not give a straight answer, but it's pretty clear that after 10 years of a boy not being able to remember the whole story, they are sacrificed. In what way, shape, or form, he refused to answer. When I asked about someone who went up the mountain, the leader became quiet. He apparently knew multiple people who braved the mountain. According to him, there are always many from any given generation wishing to break the suspicion. They must know what is up there for themselves, and they rarely return. He pointed me towards a person in the village. I had seen the woman before. She was creepy, even on first sight. He explained that they were to be wed when the woman decided to climb Tiri. She returned many months later, malnourished and apparently mad. The leader explained how it still hurts him to see the woman he once loved so broken. Before going up the mountain, she was full of life and love, where now she only mumbles odd words and doesn't interact with anyone of the village. As far as I can tell, the woman is suffering from some sort of mental deficiency or illness. After my interview with the leader, I tried making contact with her. The best I received was a few words jumbled together into an incoherent mess. I gave up on figuring out this part of the mystery. I shall leave it to the linguists and psychological researchers. Their culture forbids banishing those maddened by the mountain. Sacrificing the woman or otherwise killing her is also prohibited due to an ancient tale. Once, very long ago, someone else had been brave enough to climb the mountains. When they returned, and the tribe noticed, the climber was sacrificed. Immediately, blood rained from the skies and fell for 3 days straight. The village was all but drowned in blood, and many died in the atrocity. Ever since, not one returning villager was sacrificed. It was interesting to hear this. Many other cultures have legends of catastrophic events, such as raining blood, but never before had I heard such legends being the cause of large amounts of deaths. An interesting point to revisit at a more convenient time. Afterwards, I asked about his refusal to eat the venture. I decided not to ask him outright why he wouldn't even think of sending it to us. It just seemed more offensive than I felt was necessary. It was a simple case of choosing my words more carefully than I wrote in my notes. He was very apologetic, even saying that he wished there was a way to help us, but the gods forbade it. This, plus the suspicions of the climbing people, stopped him from offering even a single person to help us chart out these treacherous paths of the Tiri Mountains. I also rephrased the last question to, do you not want to know why people go mad after climbing the mountains? His response was a quick no. He explained how, after every person returning, the current generation is discouraged to try, or even rationalize what happened. They just accept the fact that the Tiri range is off limits and don't go near it. Mostly, he said, the tribe tries to forget the mountains even exist. One thing is for sure, I am happy I accepted this post. It's shaping up to be a more interesting study than the last research mission I was on. The geological data might be less interesting than originally thought, but documenting my journey will prove more interesting. These pages may even serve as proof that no one walking the Tiri range goes insane. Or the opposite. Day 3. Our base camp was established today. I am exhausted beyond reason. There are 3 other researchers here other than myself. There's Clemens, an older gentleman who only came to finish his career with a big research piece. He's an archaeologist with some knowledge of geology, which made my heart lighter. There is nothing worse than an archaeologist who doesn't know what he's doing. His big research piece is about currently living tribal communities and their place of origin. There is enough evidence, in his eyes at least, to prove the Porongo people lived in the Tiri range for some time, then migrated ever south. Beside him, his assistant, Troy, came along. He's trying to fill his mentor's boots, but honestly, he's a little dull. He's an archaeologist as well, however, he is nowhere near as sharp as Clemens. The boy tries hard, but his inexperience shows in many places. Too many to list. There's also a lady named Anna, who's almost as brilliant as myself. She came as our couch psychologist, since she has education in the topic, but mainly she's here as our translator and communicator between the Porongo and the team. She's also concluded some interviews with the people around the mountains, and we compared notes for a few hours. I must say the information lined up better than I expected, and it was quite a pleasant conversation. There's nothing more to say. The research is going to start tomorrow. I plan on going up to the first mountain. It's barely above a kilometer tall, and the slopes are not that hard to traverse. I'll take a few things with me, collect a few samples of the rock. It might not be something we haven't seen before, but establishing a baseline is as reasonable a place to start as any. I'm not expecting much more than basalt, if I'm honest. The others expressed their want to come along with me. The archaeologists want to tag along to see if we find any relics of note, while Anna wishes to see us work and help out where she can. Aerial shots confirm the mountain to be pocketed with a great many small crevices and caves. I don't think we are quite equipped enough to do meaningful research in one of those, but the mission is long, and I will need to at least probe them with sonar. Day 5. I missed the day, but there is nothing to report really. The team formed into two groups. The old man Clemens and Troy went to the western face of the first mountain because the first day yielded no archaeological evidence, while me and Anna chanced the east face. Neither group has found anything yet, although we did collect some soil samples. As expected, nothing more than basalt. Tomorrow I'm going to set up the high-powered laser, see if I can punch a little deeper. We were supplied with a small digger, but setting that up would take the better part of a week, especially with all the hydraulics being in pieces. I only want to resort to that once we have a baseline. See what we are actually looking for. There is talk of going further into the mountain range. I don't know how I feel about this. On one hand, we have a lot of time. We don't have to push our luck with going too fast. On the other hand, however, I do feel like we have gutted this single mountain pretty well. Day 6. The leader of the Porongo tribe came up to our base camp today. He was interested to know if we found anything. He was almost sad when we told him what little we had. Luckily for him and us, the base is not technically on the Tiri range, it's just half a kilometer down from the first mountain. When I asked the leader, he said he wanted to get to the bottom of the reason for the madness of his people. Oddly, he was very adamant that we should push for the highest mountain as soon as possible. It almost looked like he wanted us cursed, or what would be cursed in his mind. At night, we talked about the curse. Anna, being the psychologist of the group, came up with some ideas, while Clemens flaunted his brilliance in the human psyche, as he called it. Both threw wild ideas out there, while I systematically destroyed every one of them. Anna came up with the best reason out of the wild theories, which caught my imagination. There could be an atmospheric spike as the tribesmen walk up the mountains. As they ascend, it may not be as severe as when they descend. This change of pressures on the brain could cause severe damage, and in extreme cases, the psychological irregularities shown by the returning tribesmen. I wasn't able to completely convince the group this was almost impossible. Instead of trying, I simply listened on as the theories came. Day 9. I see my last passage was about Anna's reason for the madness of the indigenous people. Well, we may have found a reason for it, and it's a far cry from atmospheric changes. Halfway up the third mountain of the range, we found our first entrance. We saw it from the aerial shots, and it seemed more shallow from the air, but in person it was large, at least 20 meters in diameter and perfectly round. It was promising, and we made a smaller camp at the entrance to the apparent cave. We only brought very basic living things with us, as we planned on moving our equipment to the next camp progressively. It appears that everyone was gripped by a sense of wonder, and we decided to leave the equipment in the base camp for a short time, and instead of moving gear for days, explored a little. It was on day 8 when we first braved the cavern. We brought a couple of flashlights with replacement batteries. Feeling adventurous, we walked in. The first kilometer or so of the cave was bland. The cave didn't change in diameter at all, and it was interesting to see no wildlife living in the large opening. This seemed prime living space for any sort of cave-dwelling creature. bears, bats, even tigers or other carnivorous large cats. But the cave was empty of all life. Further in, we found a large door. The cave was covered in its entirety by a disc with a human-sized door-shaped carving at the bottom. We tried the door and it was locked. Clemens decided to take a few material samples from the disc and we started looking around. It was Troy who first noticed the 3 other doors. Every 90 degrees around the circumference of the cave, there were other doors. And us. It was an odd feeling. I saw myself from 3 different perspectives. I never thought I could look up at myself, but now I had that experience. The images were moving in sync with us, even pointing their flashlights at us as we did with them. I cannot quite find words to explain it. Troy tried climbing up to the mirror images, but failed as the walls of the cave were smoother than anything I ever touched. All 4 of us were gripped by a strange feeling. Almost as a unit, we shivered, I remember. Anna called out for us to leave, and all of us were glad to follow the command. 20 meters away from the door, the images around us disappeared. We stopped and tried a few things. Walking back a few steps where we still saw the images, going back all the way to the disc one by one. It was most odd. When we only walked back a few steps, to a point where we were sure the images around the cave were still with us, we saw nothing. Whenever one of us walked back to the disc, our images appeared. More specifically, when we would touch the door to the disc. I was there for the longest time. When I touched the door, I looked up. Immediately, I saw myself looking down at me. I moved my arms around wildly for a few seconds, then flared quicker and quicker. The image followed perfectly. I took a step back, and it did too. I tried touching the door again, but a cold sense of fear touched me. Before my hand could reach the cold stone, I decided against trying it. I looked around, shining my light at all 3 of my images for a while, but then walked back to the waiting group. Anna and Troy tried the same thing, and reported the same feeling of dread when they tried touching the door. Clemens was tired enough as it was, and wanted to go back to camp. We all agreed. I spent some time thinking about what happened, and I kept getting angrier and angrier as time went. Then I calmed myself. Afterwards, I started writing. What could this all mean? The images were definitely not mirrors. If they were, we could see our images around us immediately after we stepped back. The other 3 of us only appeared once we touched the door. Whatever it is, it's more interesting than collecting yet more granite and basalt from the mountains. Tomorrow I plan on going back in and getting myself to touch the door. We'll see if I can overcome my fear. Day 11. Today, I finally did it. I touched the door. It has been haunting me since we found it. Yesterday, I tried going out and touching it. I must have stood there for 3 or 4 hours, gathering my will to touch the door. Nothing happened. Anna and Troy walked back to base, only Clemens keeping me company. I tried distracting myself from the fear by striking up a conversation with him, but it was not very helpful. Every time I felt calm and tried touching the door, my hand would just freeze up. Then came today. I had been standing there for another hour, Anna, Troy and Clemens watching me intently, when I finally found the ounce of strength left in me to touch the door. Nothing happened. My hand touched the same cold, unfeeling stone it did before my images appeared. Then I looked at them. The vision to my left was no longer mimicking my pose. His hands were permanently stuck to the door, and his head was put up against it too. It was as if he was defeated, resting against the stone. Whatever I did, the image didn't move at all. I pointed this out to the others, who seemed oddly fascinated. They asked me to do all sorts of weird things. Troy even helped me try to do a handstand. Nothing. The image didn't move. I was so scared at this point that all I wanted to do was get out of the cave, and the others quickly followed. The image didn't. Something about that eerie, silent and calm mirror image of me still irked me after returning to camp. It was almost dark, and I announced that I would go back. I wanted to see if the image of me still be in the same position when I returned. The others hesitated a little, but after Anna offered to come with me, the man felt shamed and followed. I touched the door and looked up and to my left. The image was still touching the door, but his eyes were locked to mine. The face was completely still, but his eyes were following mine. I played with it for some time, then checked the other images. They were still following whatever I was doing. I mentioned that I wanted to touch the stone again, but everyone voted me down. They were way too creeped out, and I quickly followed them out of the cave. I'm not sure if I can sleep after witnessing what I wrote down, which is the main reason I wrote it down. I'll go now. Try and rest at least a little. Day 15. Today I finally did it. The image didn't change from what I wrote down last time. It kept eyeing me weirdly. What I'm talking about is touching the stone again. This time around, the fear was so great I almost threw up, but I managed it. I think anyone can figure out what happened. Another image, this time to my right, started watching me. I now believe this is some sort of high-level technology, and the key to opening the ring. At this point, everyone has touched the gate at least once. The odd thing is the following. Whenever we would try to touch the stone in a group, nothing happened. Only when there's a single person reflected around the chamber do the images look to them. I don't know what will happen when I touch the entrance another time. I don't think I'd be capable of doing it at all. This one was a stretch, and a lot of adrenaline had to build up before I even thought of touching the stone a second time. This is partly the reason I haven't been documenting anything. Clemens and Troy, after both touching the stone once, decided to leave the camp for a few hours, look around. They came back with nothing. They seemed almost eager to return. I don't find it odd in the slightest. The stone ring is the biggest find we ever had. We keep talking at night, theorizing what might be behind it. As I mentioned, I think it's some sort of high-level technological device. The images are a simple way to creep someone out, making them leave quickly. Anna believes it's of magical nature, something I find odd and unbelievable. Apparently she has witches in her family who, to this day, practice dark rituals. Her wanderlust pulled her away from these rituals, but she had heard of some things vaguely explainable as magic. I tend not to believe such childish views. Clemens theorized the stone circle itself might be the reason for the villagers below going mad. Seeing your own reflection without the benefits of modern technology and understanding of nature might be world-shattering. Just thinking how much fear the door caused in us, the madness can be easily understood. Troy only followed Clemens's thinking, not coming up with anything interesting on his own. As usual, he was not the greatest help, at least his heart is in the right place. Since the sleepless nights, the others started pushing me openly to touch the stone again. So far, I'm a few hours into trying to get myself to do so, but no luck yet. My mind is constantly focused on this one simple gesture. Nothing else to report, I'm afraid. I'll write more when something happens. Day 30. I'll try to get my mind in order, although it has been harder and harder to do so during the last few days and weeks. A haze descended over my mind, most likely to have been caused by the tunnel, as we came to refer to it. I still haven't touched the door. I did try a lot more, but the best I've got so far is a couple of stains of vomit on my clothes. The urge to just turn and run away from whatever primal fear lies beyond the seal is immense. It just turns the stomach after a point. Anna has reached the second touch, as well as Troy. Clemens? Clemens is no longer with us. The old man died on his attempt to touch the stone. We should have guessed, and I blame myself first of all. If I hadn't been so adamant to keep trying, we would never have had to put the old man in such a situation. It's obvious what happened. Whatever fear we felt was too much for the poor old man. His heart gave out before he could even reach out with his hand. One moment he was standing, the next he collapsed. It was the most horrifying moment of my life, and one that I will carry with me forever. The man was nothing more than a distant colleague, someone who I never really grew close to. but this horrifying, unapologetic moment of shock and horror was enough to plunge me into depression. I haven't been outside my tent for a day at least, only being sustained by the caring Anna. What little words I exchanged with her also revealed that Troy is doing just as bad, understandably. The old man was his mentor, and according to Anna, he was the main reason Troy even decided to journey to the Tiri range. We buried Clemens at base camp. The tribe even sent a tribute, a sacrifice for his honor, when they heard of the death. The leader was present and asked us about what we found. We decided to lie and explain none of the things we found. He was, again, dismayed. The death hit us hard. I don't know when we'll recover. Still have my head on touching the stone another time, but the fear is just too great. Anna and Troy both reported the same. None of us are too adventurous or daring, which makes it all the more frustrating. Day 34. I am feeling a lot better, if a little scared. I'll explain. I was in the middle of one of my, now daily, sessions of trying to touch the gate. Anna suddenly gasped and screamed. I looked at her and then on towards the way she pointed. She was aiming her finger at the image on my left, still unchanged, looking at me. The thing that inspired her horror was the other image. Clemens was walking up to the image of me, slowly, almost dragging his body. I looked back at my colleagues. There was nothing between us. Clemens definitely wasn't there. I waited, looking at the three versions of Clemens walking to the three versions of me. The single remaining mirror image that still followed me was left alone. Clemens's mirror image merely passed through it. When it reached the two that were stuck to the door, I barely found the strength to keep my footing. Clemens's image descended upon mine in a wild flurry. His fingers tore at the flesh of my image. After mauling the body for a little while, whatever this apparition taking Clemens's form started bringing its head closer, then started devouring the flesh of my image. I ran out of the cave, not even stopping for breath. It was only at the distant entrance that I saw Anna and Troy quickly following behind me. We took some time to catch our breath. Troy was hysteric, crying, screaming and mumbling uncontrollably. I understood his hysteria. His mentor, and a longtime friend, devoured another man in front of his eyes. We took him into his tent, calming him and basically lulling him to sleep. We could barely hold ourselves. I could see the same fear in the eyes of Anna that I felt. After a quick rest, I decided to go back. I wanted to see if the same thing would happen. I took Anna with me, after a long time of convincing, as well as a pocket watch. I tossed the watch to her before I walked up. I had no intention of touching the stone this time, although I still felt the same fear as I stepped up to the stone. I watched on as my images appeared and waited. As Clemens's image appeared, I asked Anna about the time. 34 minutes passed, exactly. In a single minute sharp, Clemens's image was upon mine. I started feeling a tingling in my chest, which quickly developed into a sharp pain, and we decided to leave the place. As soon as I walked far enough from the stone so my images disappeared, the pain went away in a blink. I still don't know what's happening here. I'm hoping that touching the stone would give me the answer. Now we have a time limit though. I have no doubt in my mind that if I were to stand by and watch Clemens eat my mirror image, I could die. If not from anything else, the pain would surely prove too much to handle. It already almost did. We stopped trying to explain the things we see. We just accept them as they are. Funny position, seeing as we came here, understanding the fears of the people, but trying to rationalize them. All I want is to touch the stone again. But I cannot. Day 40. I don't want to say that I knew this would happen, but I somehow felt it. Troy is no longer with us. His body is not recoverable. We found, after my timing of the appearance of Clemens, that both others had the same thing happen to them. I wish we had someone who hadn't touched the stone yet. We could see if Clemens haunted them too. Troy was up at the stone, trying to gather his desperate will when the time was upon us. I explained this to Troy, who merely nodded. I was sure he knew the risks. We had informed him what happened with me when I lingered around too long. He wasted so much time that the pain started. We watched as Clemens tore into a student, then switched our gaze back at Troy himself. He was screaming in pain on the floor. Anna was the first to try and reach him. A force stopped her. She cried out, and I threw myself forward, warded by a broken nose as I ran straight into what felt like a brick wall. I screamed too, the sound all but muted compared to the sound that came from Troy. The boy was in deep anguish, and this much was understandable. All we could do was stand by. We could have walked out, but we didn't. I think something, maybe the same thing that inspired the fear in us, stopped us from walking away from the horrid scene. The watch in Anna's hand was still going. After 10 minutes exactly, the noise from Troy went away. Anna, having sat down facing the horrid scene, jumped up and tried to approach the silent boy, but the same brick wall was in place. Since we couldn't leave or approach, we waited on. Another 5 minutes passed when Troy's body lurched up. He mumbled something, the sound almost wet, as his blood pumped up from his throat, causing both me and Anna to quickly throw up from the door. Neither of us understood what the boy was saying. Then, as soon as we had finished coloring the ground yellow, the body floated upwards. Slowly it rose while we watched. As soon as it touched the upper wall of the chamber, it disappeared. And I mean that in the full meaning of the word. As the tallest point on the body touched the hewn stone, it went away. We can't figure out where. And we don't want to either. After a while, Anna walked close to the door. I was outside the boundaries of the images. As soon as she was within touching distance of the stone, Clemens and Troy appeared on the 3 other sides. She screamed and ran into my arms. We stood still, neither of us knowing what to do. Then we walked back to camp. She moved into my tent. We both feel a lot better with the other nearby. It's obvious both of us are scared beyond words. However, when I tried to talk to her about leaving, the words failed me. I could talk around the situation, but could never explicitly say, we should leave. I noticed she was struggling with the same thing. As I fell asleep, I knew we wouldn't go away from here until we figured out what was going on, or died. Day 42. With Clemens and Troy now a constant, immediate threat, I don't know if we'll ever figure out a way to touch the stone final time. We started trying new things, running at the stone, arms stretched, closing our eyes, trying to touch the stone with the other's guidance. Anything that would come to mind and wasn't stupid, we would try. Nothing. Anna started following my example and is writing a journal of her own. She says that if anything were to happen to her, at least her thoughts and ideas would be finalized. I find her defeatist attitude understandable, but somewhat discouraging. I still hold hope. We will know what is beyond the stone wall, and I promise this. Day 45. We made a new camp, inside the circular chambers. Camp is just a few steps away from the line where our images disappear, making it suitable for our research. We are not here to find out more about the villages of the Tiri range. We are here to touch a single block of stone. We are not here to collect data on the geological makeup of the range. We are here to find out the meaning behind this single roadblock. Talking of it, we found something odd. Before, the images of the staring people would not appear if there was more than one person at the gate. This hasn't changed. However, when one of us leaves the other at the entrance, the image shimmers and changes, and the staring copies appear, with Clemens and Troy quickly closing in. This has not happened before. The images would stay our mirrors as long as the person at the gate walked away and re-entered the zone. An odd development, but I fail to see the use in it. The fear returns as soon as the other person leaves. We can't use it to sneak our way in, and touching the stone together still awards us with a big bag of nothing. I have no idea if we'll ever figure out what to do. We can't leave. Whatever force is behind the stone is keeping us here. We can't enter. The fear is too great. There are no other options. Day 48. I am alone now. Anna has passed. It was today. We were still trying to touch the stone. And she did it. There was an odd rumbling, and she threw up for the third time today. I started looking at her images. All three were now staring at her and humming, mouth wide open. I tried to approach, but the brick wall I broke my nose on previously stopped me again. Suddenly, Anna went stiff, standing up. I had never seen her act this way. Her hands flew to the stone again, and she mimicked the three other images. She was humming a low tone, along with her now identical images. I tried to call out to her, but the sound was deafening. I don't think she heard me. Then it started. The stone became what seemed a thick liquid, and it started pulling her in. The images followed. I could do nothing, and she didn't seem auto-bothered by the event. I watched and timed it. In 4 minutes sharp, she was fully enveloped by the stone, and she was gone. I tried desperately to follow her, to find a way to push through the fear, but no amount of mantra repeating or punching myself could get me to touch the stone. I have no idea how she did it. I don't remember her telling me she would attempt it. Glennis and Troy were pushing quickly towards her images. There is nothing else in my life now. All I want, and all I wish, and all I need is to touch the stone. Maybe Anna is alive on the other side. Maybe all my hopes and dreams lie beyond the door. I have to go back. I'll keep trying.
There is no meaning left. The darkened wheel of the gods is now turning. It is eternal and all-devouring. The faces are complete, coming together. All there is wasn't. All there was isn't. We are now all. All is now none. The day ends. The day ends.